Hi, everybody. This is Lisa Colon-Delay back again. And today I'm going to be sharing a little bit about what I'm going to share on Sunday for a Sunday school class I'm teaching. We do a rotation at my church and we take turns doing the Sunday school class. And there's material provided, but we're allowed to riff and freestyle a little bit. And what I was hoping to do is to bring other theories of atonement to our understanding. One of them that I think is incredibly overlooked and extremely powerful is the work of Réne Girard, who was a critic and a cultural theorist, a literary, a teacher of literature, and just has a fantastic way of understanding what we can call the scapegoat mechanism. We still see the scapegoat mechanism playing out in our world when people are the brunt of our frustrations, our anger. And what Girard says is that a proper scapegoat and the scapegoat mechanism work when people don't realize that they're scapegoating. It is happening when it is unconscious. And what happens is a person or a group is scapegoated, and on them is taken on the frustrations, even the sins, or this discomfort, the pain, and all the anger and resentment of a group. And the scapegoat seems to be guilty by at least on the surface. But if you look a little deeper, the scapegoat is always an innocent victim. They are not deserving of the kind of punishment and even death they receive. And we see that the most vulnerable are scapegoated. When we look back in history, we see this time and time and time again. What I wanted to do is to bring in the thoughts of Réne Girard, not to present a complete picture of atonement, but to add an element to our understanding that's very important for understanding how human violence works in our culture, in our hearts, and how Réne Girard presents Jesus as this ultimate redemptive answer to all our human violence by absorbing that violence and putting an end to the scapegoat mechanism by being the ultimate scapegoat. Now, this lesson was not learned, and we continue to scapegoat. We do not think that we are crucifying Christ over and over and over again when we create scapegoat groups or scapegoat people. We see the scapegoat mechanism playing out in ways where a CEO will take a fall and be fired for something the company has done. The CEO, yes, they're ultimately in charge, but of some accident or misfortune of the company, it was out of their control. Really, they're just kind of put through the ringer and fired. Now, in the case of CEOs, of course, maybe we see them as, they're overpaid, they should answer for this, and we need a sacrifice. So this is what happens. We see this sometimes with football coaches. We can see that why a coach and a team didn't do very well may not actually have anything to do with the coach, but these coaches get fired and they are scapegoats. And it functions this way. These are even, you could say, almost benign evidences of scapegoating. We see it more seriously with minority groups, vulnerable groups, in terms of the foreigner and people who are escaping their country from violence, and then they're put in a terrible position of being legally vulnerable, physically vulnerable, and financially vulnerable. And then they are presented as our enemy. And then they seem to deserve all this punishment and persecution we put their way. So I want to read this now. And I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. The author of this is Mark Anspach, or Anspach, Anspach. And I will leave the link to this so you can read it for yourself. It was at imitatio.org, and it has to do with Réne Girard's legacy. A lot of people haven't even heard of Réne Girard, and that's another reason why I want to bring his work into a more familiar place for some of us. He died recently somewhat recently in 2015. So here's the article. Sometimes the greatest ideas appear to be simple ones. The famed critic and cultural theorist Réne Girard, who passed away at his Stanford home in November on the 4th, 2015, gave the world a set of deceptively simple ideas that have changed the way we think about desire, violence, religion, and human nature itself. What do people really want? Why do they fight? What is religion all about? And how did human culture get started in the first place? Girard tackled such bedrock questions head on, offering boldly original answers expressed in admirably clear language. The last of the grand theorists, he was a sophisticated continental thinker who always kept his feet planted firmly on the ground. His ideas are never purely theoretical. They help make sense of everyday life. And this is what I actually really love about Réne Girard. Theorists come and go, their ideas come and go, and sometimes they're very heady and abstract and logical, but not applicable. What Réne Girard speaks of, we see play out day after day in our interactions, in broader cultural themes. Another reason to really pay close attention. Going back to the article, take the familiar plight of a teenage girl who falls for her best friend's boyfriend. She doesn't mean to hurt her friend, but there's just something about this boy that draws her to him irresistibly. Can she help it if he happens to be so much more desirable than all the other boys? Situations of that type crop up again and again. They are a staple of classic literature as well as high school melodrama. Are they produced by bad luck or fate? Girard suggests that something else is involved, what he calls mimetic desire. A mimetic desire is a desire imitated from a person who serves as a model. If two girls are best friends, they probably imitate each other's tastes in clothes and music. Why wouldn't they end up sharing the same taste in boys? Alas, some things are more easily shared than others. Singing along to the same pop songs makes for harmony, but not lusting after the same guy. What do people want? The great secret is that at the deepest level, none of us truly knows what to want. Human nature is not fixed. Our desires are open-ended and malleable. That is why we so often resort to following the lead of those around us. I'll just stop to say we're all victims or accomplices in cultural trends. We want to feel included. We don't want to feel left out. We want to feel accepted. We want to feel with it. Even when we're playing the rebel or the alternative type of personality, there's something that is sort of catchy about that we feel a part of something. Let's see where, here I go. This is why we often resort to following the lead of those around us. More than any other animal, humans learned through imitation. They learn through human imitation. And you can see this so well in youngsters. Young humans imitate their parents. They might try to put on their clothing or their shoes and talk like them. Girard shows what happens when imitation extends to the realm of desire. Mimetic desire leads pell-mell to rivalry, or you could say helter-skelter or something like that. I had to look up what pell-mell meant because I have not really heard that word used very much. Quote, two desires converging on the same object are bound to clash, Girard writes. Here, the seemingly simple idea of an imitated desire produces an unexpected result. Rather than bring people together, convergence gives rise to hostility. Conflict is less a result of differences than a fateful lack of difference. Why do people fight? Because, Girard says, we are so much alike. I'm going to pause for a moment to also underscore that Girard says this is why racial tensions are what they are. As people considered in different racial classes, this was a construct in the first place. People are just of different ethnic origins and concentrations. But as people wanted to consider themselves white and others black so that they could be commodified in the slave trade, there was a lot of difference. We're different than these people. These people aren't even human. We can enslave them. As these differences got less different, as people got more equality and were seen as more the same intellectually in every other way, mimetic desire and then conflict increases. The more people get the same. And the more power, you could say, equalizes, or the potential for power to equalize, the more you're going to have conflict. And that is a mimetic desire kind of conflict. And this is a really fascinating thing. We think it's the opposite. We think that difference creates conflict, and difference sort of creates spheres, but it is sameness that creates conflict in this theory. And I think it's a very, very compelling theory. Réne Girard, his vision is at once optimistic but tragic. Optimistic in that violence is not chalked up to innate aggressive or antisocial impulses. We might have some of those, I'll stop to say, but mostly we know and we must cooperate with each other to continue existing. And if we didn't, we wouldn't still be here. Humans aren't violent by nature because our nature is social, though violence will crop up, of course. If we were just violent by nature, we would have basically, I believe Girard is trying to suggest that if we were just violent by nature, we would have already extinguished our species. We rely on others to show us how we live. Yet, the same social impulses put us on a collision course when each wants what the other wants. And here I'll stop to say, it is not a coincidence then that one of the 10 commandments is thou shalt not covet. This is a social ill, a social sin. It is based on this idea, this foundational idea of human nature that is mimetic desire. To covet is to want what the other person has. They are the model and you are imitating them. You think, well, they seem pretty happy with that new car or that new relationship or that new job. And what we wind up doing is not even wanting that object, but wanting what we feel will happen, what we'll feel inside, and what we assume that other person feels inside when they possess that thing. This is why I believe thou shalt not covet is such an important commandment, is such a foundational commandment, because it is keeping in check mimetic desire. It's saying, watch how you are wanting what other people have. This is a social ill that will create fighting and sin, essentially. It will create harm. The tragedy is that even without deliberate evil on anyone's part, our social nature consistently pits us against each other. The earliest human groups could not have survived without some means of keeping rivalry in check. Before any authorities existed to maintain order, how was violence controlled? Girard sought an answer to this riddle in Greek tragedy and the myths and rituals of pre-state societies. For a scholar who has built his reputation on the study of desire in the European novel, it was an audacious move. It soon led him to a revolutionary hypothesis. Human culture began with religion, and religion arose from our species needing to master its own violence. The key to Girard's anthropological theory is what he calls the scapegoat mechanism. Just as desires tend to converge on the same object, violence tends to converge on the same victim. The violence of all against all gives way to the violence of all against one. When the crowd vents its violence on a common scapegoat, unity is restored. but it is temporary. Sacrificial rites the world over are rooted in this mechanism and continue in certain forms today. We see it in such firings of CEOs or NFL coaches, like I mentioned before. One big idea is enough to ensure any thinker's place in history. With mimetic desire and the scapegoat mechanism, Réne Girard had come up with two. He went for three by proposing a radical new interpretation of the Bible. The Hebrew Scriptures and the Gospels break with the previous religions, he argued, by progressively demystifying and rejecting the scapegoat mechanism. Joseph triumphs over attempts to persecute or slander him. Job refuses to accept blame for his own suffering. Jesus stops the stoning of a woman accused of adultery. His crucifixion stands as the ultimate symbol of the murder of innocent victims. So what Mark Anspach is saying is that in the Bible, and culminating then with Jesus as the ultimate sacrificed innocent victim, the Bible pushes against the scapegoat mechanism we are wont to do, and we will do. Different characters in the Bible push against this. Job refuses to accept blame for his own suffering. This is kind of a revolutionary thing. This pushed back against, well, if bad things are happening to you, you must be to blame. You must have to pay for something you did because you're the scapegoat for your own misfortune. And Joseph, in the Bible, the Old Testament, triumphs over attempts to persecute or slander him. He does not get back at his brothers through some scapegoat mechanism. He actually forgives his brothers and helps them beat out a famine and starvation by providing for them. And then ultimately Jesus, he becomes the ransom for many. He is the innocent one put to death in capital punishment, which is the ultimate scapegoat mechanism for a superpower, for the state to make scapegoats out of people who are innocent. And we see in the United States how many of these death row inmates get overturned through DNA, through evidence. For some reason, miscarriages of justice happen quite frequently for people who are going to be executed by the state, by the federal government, or by the state governments of the United States. I think it's not a surprise that there are innocent people going to die, because in our minds, they're paying for the sins of the many. Now, it is completely unjust, but this is how we work as human beings. So Jesus, God in human form, comes and says, you're violent, you're living mimetically, and you're killing innocent people. I am going to be the last scapegoat you will ever need, and I'm going to remedy that. We didn't learn that's what was happening. We didn't learn that at all. After, in this country anyway, in the United States, once slaves were free after the Civil War, an enormous amount of lynchings happened. Thousands and thousands and thousands. These were extrajudicial incidences of scapegoating people. Sometimes they were completely innocent. Other times their charges they were under suspicion, perhaps, but they had no due process. They had no way to defend themselves, and they were lynched. And there was an entire culture that celebrated this in white culture that was trying to assert its dominance. The difference had become too small, and white culture was pushing back and saying, no, we're in charge, stay in your place. And this happened again and again as people were made scapegoats. So I appreciate this discovery, if you will, this understanding Réne Girard has for how human desire works socially, mimetically, and how we must accept that we will violently persecute and harass and even murder the innocent. And that's why we surrender that to the cross. We allow that Jesus' death is the ultimate and final one, and we set the prisoners free. We allow our vengeance does not become allowed to take over, to have eminence for us. So that is just something to think about. I don't know that this is the entire span of what atonement theories are, but it is a very, very helpful one as we understand and move into better understandings of our social nature. I hope that was helpful, and let me know what you think.